Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums. We sat down and we listened to the artist's vision and concept. Pink Floyd, The Division Bell. Pink Floyd, The Division Bell was the band's 14th studio album. It was released in March of 1994 and was immediately a #1 album. A very, very big, successful album from a band that makes very big, successful albums. There are two singles, Take It Back and High Hopes, which were both released from this album. I remember thinking at the time that they were boring, but they're not bad songs. It's really weird, isn't it? This is like one of these things where it sort of engages you. You feel like a fish on a hook a little bit, and you're kind of flapping around on the line with the hook in your mouth. I'm not surprised that they weren't bigger hits, but they do stand out as being cut specifically to be singles. What I will say is that it had initially a Sunday morning feeling. That was the thing that really struck me initially. It sounded like Sunday morning in England. It had that sort of quiet calm to it. It was a very sort of gentle arrival. Almost like a kind of post, Saturday night art at the club, like an old codger going to a club kind of feel. That's what it really felt like. You've got songs like Cluster One and What Do You Want From Me? You have the Poles Apart and Marooned. And these songs are really just chill out zones. That's the best way to describe them. Almost post-apocalyptic Pink Floyd. They've sort of self-combusted. Roger Waters has left the building a very long time ago. I think that there was some kind of huge deal between Dave Gilmour and Roger Waters where Dave Gilmour paid to keep the Pink Floyd name and tour and basically release this album with himself and Rick Wright doing the writing. Roger Waters described this album as just rubbish, which I think kind of really speaks to the division between Roger Waters and David Gilmour at this time. The album was recorded at Britannia Rose Studios, as well as Abbey Road and Metropolis Studios, and Houseboat Astoria, which is Dave Gilmour's boat. A Great Day for Freedom, there's Wearing the Inside Out. There is Coming Back to Life, Keep Talking, which featured a snippet of Stephen Hawking in a TV advertisement. David Gilmour was passionate about bringing this inspired speech to the album because he said it went against everything that he stood for because it came from an advertisement, but he felt that the advertising campaign was so passionate that he wanted to include it on this album. David Gilmour has a line in one of the songs, again, they kind of all blend into one. This is what concept albums can sometimes do. And what's interesting is that by the time 1994 is rolled around, I don't quite know how to explain the way this feels, but now it feels like something that Dire Straits would do. It sounds like a Dire Straits album. It doesn't really sound like a Pink Floyd album to me. It could quite, if someone was just to play a snippet of this for me, I'd say, oh, it's Dire Straits. No, it's not Dire Straits. Oh, it's KLF. You know when KLF did this kind of very chilled out ambient thing on The White Room? That's what's here on The Division Bell. There's this kind of, as I've said it before, it's this sort of old codger of having had a night on the town is like smoking a blunt, on the sofa in, the mansion on Sunday morning. That's the feeling of this whole album, which is like, you're like this, you're very like, you have no energy to spend, really. And it's very sort of breathy and it's reflective. There's a sadness to it, melancholy. And one of the lines says that, someone tells him to go and fuck yourself on that's one of the lyrics from one of the songs. And this stands out as by far the most aggressive and let me just replay that. Did I hear that correctly? That is exactly what I heard. And the shock value of saying go and fuck yourself is really the most aggressive thing that happens on this album. It's a very gentle, reflective sort of yearning. There's almost like that sort of enigma thing going on. Enya, this very sort of big, spacey, I suppose enigmatic. You know, not everyone's going to respond to it the same way. I don't know what necessarily they're trying to communicate with this album, except that they've got too much money, maybe. That's what it seems like. How do I feel about this? It's no Dark Side of the Moon, that's for sure. You do have some background vocals here, but it never really reaches any sort of stage of utter mania that Dark Side of the Moon really reaches, I feel, through the female voice, real extremes of emotion. It's a thoughtful album. It's just really something that you just will sit and ponder to, and you kind of lose yourself for an hour and a half. That's the best way I can describe it. It's almost like you're in a meadow with those two things that are on the cover, which have the village green beyond those sort of like space age sort of landing craft or whatever they are. As I sit here and review it, I'm actually falling to sleep reviewing it. And that's not because I don't like it. That wouldn't be fair. There's a gentleness to it. I don't know what I was expecting. I did like the album, and the reason I listened to it was because of Dark Side of the Moon, and I knew that this would be an interesting thing to listen to. In the final summation, I would award 82%. I don't know that it's necessarily an album that anyone needs to revisit. Once you've heard it, it's created its kind of own space within you, almost like an air bubble, and it just sort of stays there, really. I don't really know how to explain it. It's almost like the monolith in 2001. It makes that noise for the rest of history. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, recommend it to friends, post comments. Also, if you have an album that you'd like to hear reviewed, we welcome your requests.